This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Chapter 2 introduces the CIMA risk management cycle. This is a very important diagram. It's one which comes up in objective test questions. For example, they can show you the diagram with some of the boxes blanked out and ask you to fill in or drag suitable descriptors to those boxes. There's nothing particularly difficult about it. There's nothing that's particularly unusual or unexpected about it. But you do have to know the sequence of events and kind of what they're called. And it starts off at the top left here with establishing a risk management group and set goals. Now, ultimately, it is the job of the board to monitor risks and to ensure that the strategic risk and operational risk and so on, and that the risks accurately balance the risk appetite of the shareholders and other stakeholders. But as in many parts of the management of a business, the board subcontracts, if you like, or appoints committees or groups to look after certain aspects of management. And similarly here, in large companies, there will be a risk management group to which the management of risk is kind of delegated by the board. There have to be set goals. For example, the risk appetite. How much risk are we willing to take in this company, and so on. So the first thing these people must do is to identify the risk areas, and the ways of identifying the risk areas we will see shortly. But for example, just by walking around, looking at machines, seeing where a machine has its guard off and seems to be in a dangerous case, a dangerous situation. We then have to understand and assess the risk. For example, how likely is this risk to occur? How bad will it be if it does occur? And then decide what to do about it, develop a risk response. Once we know what we want to do about it, then we have to allocate responsibilities to people and have a strategy. The strategy might be, for example, that you get external consultants who come in to inspect certain parts of the operations of the company. And then nothing's going to work without proper controls and monitoring of those controls. It's all very well saying you have to inspect that machine every week, but if there isn't a control, for example, somebody just signing off a document, and then somebody has to monitor the signing off of that document to make sure the risk management is actually being put into effect, then it won't happen, or it may happen for the first few weeks and then will fall into disuse afterwards. And then nothing really stands still, nothing is perfect. You look to see how happy you are with the risk management solutions. If you're trying to reduce the risk of bad products going to customers and having returns, you need to measure really how well you're doing and see whether or not the improvement is good enough. You will be keeping records of, say, the number of accidents at work. You'll be keeping records of the number of times you had to write off bad debts. And from time to time you will decide that maybe we have to change the types of risks we're looking at, and we have to maybe change the management methods. Similarly, if we suddenly start exporting, a whole new variety of risks is opened up. How do we make sure we get paid? How do we make sure that we don't suffer adversely from currency? How do we make sure that the goods don't get damaged in transit? So this is something which has gone round and round and round kind of thing over and over again, kind of striving for perfection. So risk identification was one of the first things that came in here. And here's just a kind of general list of all the things that might help. Physical inspection. Look at guardrails. Look for cables going across the floor that people might trip on. Inspect documents. If you're saying that we need to set a credit limit for somebody, then inspect the document and see how somebody has actually arrived at a suitable credit limit. Inquire of people, ask people, have you seen anything risky? Is there anything that worries you? Have you had a near accident, for example? Brainstorming, a group of people kind of sitting around a table and almost coming out with outrageous ideas. But the point of brainstorming is to throw the net very, very widely, to take into account even risks which are very, very low in probability, but at least to recognize them, and then later on you can say, well, I'll discount that or I'll ignore that because it is of such little consequence or so unlikely. But if you never, as I say, throw the net widely to start with, you run the risk of overlooking some events which could be quite damaging. Checklists. Well, checklists, we have that in airlines. Before takeoff, first officer and the pilot, they go through checklists. They make sure the parts of the aeroplane are working, the right fuel is there, that the right height is put in, and so on. Becoming common now in hospitals. Before you start an operation on someone, make sure that you have the supplies of the right blood available and the like. Benchmarking. Perhaps compare our performance with other people's. What's our industrial accident rate compared to other people in the same business? And if we're having more serious injuries at work than equivalent businesses, then I would suggest you found an area which needs some attention to reduce the risk. External events. We could be looking at maybe the price of oil going up. That's particularly risky for, say, an airline. We could be looking at political unrest, which is going to maybe hurt our market. We could be looking for technical breakthroughs. For example, in the car industry, if someone now comes with a fantastic technical breakthrough on battery technology that kind of extends the range of battery cars to 500 plus kilometers, then we need to be aware of that if we're in that business. Internal events. It could be people leaving. Suddenly the turnover of our staff has risen. Why is that? Is that because they're overworked? Is it because we've put in some sort of extra rule into their employment that they're not kind of happy with? Is it internal evidence of an external event that our competitors are paying much more? A leading event indicator gives you advanced warning of something going wrong. So if you're looking at a customer paying, and they pay kind of 30 days, and then they begin paying kind of 40 days, and then kind of 50 days, 60 days. So you're not kind of too worried just yet, but things are getting slower. And as they keep getting slower, I mean, it's indicative really that customer may be in financial difficulty, and given another couple of months, maybe it's 90 days, and then another month, maybe they're in liquidation, we're never going to get paid. Trends and root causes is simply saying that when you see something happening, perhaps sales are falling off, that's the trend, you have to try to burrow down to find why have sales fallen off. Is it something we have done that we've developed a bad reputation for quality? Is it simply seasonal? Is it the economy has had a bit of a hard time and that's hurting us? Is it perhaps that our competitors have come out with a much better product? Escalation triggers. An escalation trigger, for example, you're paying your sales tax in the UK VAT, and if you're late 1 month, nothing much happens. You're late a second month, nothing much happens. But perhaps if you're late a third month, then a fine comes in. So suddenly the seriousness of the problem escalates into something we really need to take note of. And finally, event interdependencies here. If sales fall off, we're going to have an adverse cash flow. But what's going to happen to all that inventory that's in the warehouse that's perhaps never going to sell, and which has got a kind of sell by date, it's deteriorating and so on. So the fact that sales have gone down is then hurting the valuation of our inventory. So that's risk identification. And after the risk identification, we have to understand and assess the risk here. And this is a very, very common diagram. This is known as risk mapping. And it looks at the severity or impact of the risk and the frequency or probability or likelihood of it happening. So, and different companies might put these events in different sort of categories in some cases. It's up to the company to decide where the appropriate mapping is going to be. So let's look up here. Loss of small suppliers. So a loss of a small supplier, you don't lose suppliers that often. They're not going to go out of business that often. So it's kind of low frequency. But assuming they're one of many, and they're not kind of monopoly suppliers, you can easily go to another supplier and get your goods. So it's a fairly low severity, low frequency, and so on. And we need to think what we're going to do about that. We'll see in a moment what we might do about it. Out here, loss of senior staff. Not going to happen very often. But if you lose a very talented, say, a researcher or a very talented salesperson, then the consequence could be very high, and we need to worry about that one just a little bit more. If we go down to here, we have turnover of staff, turnover of what I might call low-level staff, kind of fairly basic staff. In a large organisation, this is kind of very frequent. Okay, you have to spend money recruiting, you have to spend money training, and so on. But really, it's a relatively low cost in the scheme of things. And again, we need to think of maybe the appropriate response to that. And then finally, out here, where we have perhaps a high risk. Now, I put in failure of a computer system here. One is to hope that failure of the computer system is not high. But in some organizations, undoubtedly, they have ongoing problems with their computer systems. And for those organizations, it could be a high risk. That happens quite frequently. And depending on the sort of business it's in, it could be rather deadly for them. If you're an airline with an unreliable computer system and you can't take over the internet bookings, then you're going to be in big trouble. And we need to think of an appropriate response for that. Another way of setting out exactly the same sort of stuff is this here. This is not as common a form of a risk map. But basically we're going to be saying there's some pretty low risks down here, low severity, low frequency, and we're almost going to be saying we'll live with those. We can nearly ignore them. Out here, we have these very large risks, high probability, high severity. They really must come front of the queue when we're thinking what to do about them, because these could be fatal to the organisation. And then in the middle, we've got risks to be managed, and by and large, try to do something to reduce those in some way, to ameliorate those in some way, so they're either not as likely, or if they do happen, perhaps not quite as severe. Now this is the response. Now we have exactly the same diagram here as we had here. Severity and impact across the top going low-high, frequency and probability going down the side. But what happens here, simply the way it came up, it's high-low, but that's fine. So let's think of where we have here low frequency and low severity. This on the previous diagram was, I think, what we call the loss of small suppliers. I'm probably going to put up with that. Something that happens maybe once a year. We find another supplier pretty easily. Why would you spend an awful lot of management time kind of worrying about it? So the CIMA response is TARA in here. It's also known as the 4 T's here. So in terms of the CIMA response, this would be accept. In terms of the 4 T's, it would be tolerate. Up here, we have fairly high frequency but relatively low severity. The example I gave for that was a loss of relatively low-level staff here. So it happens a lot. It's relatively low severity, and what we would really try and is maybe try to reduce it a little bit. It's still a bit of a nuisance. It's not deadly, but there is an expense involved in recruiting and training people. It might be easy to do a little investigation to see why staff turnover is so high. It might be something that's fixed by just changing the pay and conditions very, very slightly. Maybe by giving people training so they feel more comfortable in the organisation. Maybe by bringing in some sort of long service award, so if they stay for 5 years they get a little bonus and so on. Might very significantly reduce or control that for not very much money. So that's really the R of TARA, that is the reduce or treat it. Here we have transfer or insure. Here we have high severity but very low probability. And this of course is what we do. When we have a risk of high severity but low probability, we tend to seek insurance. We do this for where we live. We take out fire insurance. The risk of it happening is very low, but my goodness me, if it happens, we want to be covered. We take out car insurance. Hopefully the risk that we have an accident is low, but if we have an accident, it could be very serious for us or the other party, and so on. Another way of transferring this here, and this is a T of TARA, is that you could get into maybe a joint venture, so at least you kind of share it with another joint venturer, or maybe you subcontract it. So if you find your building is filled with asbestos and you have to get rid of it, then what everybody does, they don't try it themselves. It's a very specialist job, high risk. You subcontract it to a specialist firm who will take on the risk of removing this very poisonous substance. And finally, up here, we have high severity and we have high risk. The suggestion there is that you abandon or avoid it. So high risk, high severity, so it's like investing maybe in a very unstable country or a very unstable economy. Just don't do it. Or if you are trying to develop maybe a pharmaceutical and you find perhaps it's got a lot of side effects there that maybe come to haunt you later on, well don't do that. Just avoid that risk entirely. It's simply not worth the effort, if you like. What we need to do in some of this also is to make sure that the benefit of the risk response, whatever we're doing, does it exceed the cost. So, for example, if you're reducing the risk here of your staff turnover, I said maybe we can do that by small improvements in the pay and conditions there. There's no point in kind of doubling people's salary to reduce a little bit the staff turnover, because the cost of the treatment, if you like, or the cost of reducing this far exceeds any benefit that's likely to come from it. Risk cube is quite an interesting way of thinking how we could reduce the risk. This is really looking at almost the treatment of the risk here. Again, there are two kind of definitions you need to use here. First of all, there is gross risk. That is the assessment of the risk before any kind of controls or transfer, any kind of mitigation steps are taken at all. And then by taking various mitigation steps, what you can do is you can reduce that risk down to a net risk or a residual risk. And there are three things you can look at to try to reduce the risk here. You can reduce the threat, you can reduce the vulnerability, and you can reduce the value of the asset, which is actually at risk there. So, for example, let's say we had a warehouse full of high value but relatively flammable materials. One way in which you can reduce the risk, of course the risk is fire and destruction. One way in which you can reduce the risk is maybe simply to hold a lower value, a lower quantity of goods. So what we're doing here is reducing the asset that is at risk. So instead of holding 5 million in the warehouse, hold 2 million in the warehouse. Or maybe what you do is you split the 5 million between two warehouses and have 2.5 in each, so that in each kind of risk center, if you like, there is only half the asset which is at risk. The threat which you have here, why does stuff go on fire, really? And the way you can reduce the threat would be to have very stringent, I mean most commercial places will have this now, but say to people you can't smoke. Say to people you're not allowed to take matches or cigarette lighters even into the warehouse there. You could reduce it, reduce the threat of it happening there by maybe inspecting the wiring very, very carefully, frequently, so the chance of a electrical fire starting off is much less. So you can reduce the threat. And then you can reduce the vulnerability there. Okay, the asset is there, the threat has come to pass, so a fire has been kind of sparked off, if you like, in the warehouse. How vulnerable are we? Well, put in smoke alarms, maybe put in sprinkler systems and so on, which is going to reduce the damage then that any fire would actually result in. So very interesting kind of approach, this risk cube. Look at the asset, what's at risk, look at the threat, what's the thing you don't want to happen, for example fire, and then reduce the vulnerability to fire. What we next need to do is to look at, having got our risks identified, having got our strategy towards those risks sorted out, whether we're going to treat them, avoid them, where we're going to put up with them, tolerate them, whether we're going to transfer them and so on. So we know the risks, we've kind of worked out what we want to do about it. We need a system really to make sure that this is going to be controlled properly. And the system here is the risk register, really, or a good part of it. You write it down in a big book, really. Well, nowadays it would be in a computer database. This is the only way you're going to actually make use of all of this work and planning which you've carried out. So you would describe what the risk is. So the risk might be, we've seen cables going across the floor in the office, and that someone is going to trip up and break an arm. The date it is identified. And then we go through this, what we're going to do about it, is it worth doing anything about it? So the estimated likelihood of occurrence before mitigation, and indeed the impact before mitigation. So how likely is it to occur, and what damage will be done? So you might say that, okay, if someone's going to trip on this, and if they trip on it, the chances are they will break an arm. So that could be pretty kind of high pre-mitigation rating. And then we have to tell someone, you are responsible for this, you know. If somebody trips and damages himself, this is going to be pinned on you. You have been given responsibility for this. And we decide, or perhaps this person decides, or perhaps this person is told what to do. What are you going to do about the risk? Are we going to tolerate it, live with it? Are we going to avoid it by abandoning all cables in the office whatsoever? Are we going to reduce it, treat it in some way? Maybe by taping them down or covering them with those kind of flat rubber things, or maybe we can put the cables onto the floorboards, or whatever we're going to be doing there. Or maybe we insure. And of course you could do probably two of those. Insurance is never kind of mutually exclusive. And then we'll say, right, if we put these, put one of these rubber kind of mats over the cables, have we made it safe? There's no point in taking on a risk strategy, if you like, if it doesn't improve stuff, bring it down to an acceptable level. And we say, right, the chance of anyone now actually hurting themselves in this cable is really, really very low, and so on. So that's its post-mitigation rating would be coming out. Very unlikely to occur. If it did occur, they'd still break their arm. If you're going to stop them breaking their arm, you have to put kind of bouncy floor covering around. We're not suggesting that. And then we're going to give somebody a deadline. This is pretty serious. It's pretty easy to fix. We'll give you 2 weeks to do this. Yeah, and then we need these people to write in when they did it and to sign it off. And there could even be another column in this for a manager going around and making sure that the risk owner has actually taken appropriate steps to reduce that risk.
This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.